Morning. Whoa. Somebody must have been up here thinking I was 6 foot or something. Drop this down just a hair. All right, Acts chapter 9, starting in 23, as you can tell by what's up there on the board. I'm going to change some things up from my slides just a wee bit. It'll be okay. It'll be all right. We'll all get through it. We'll focus more on 10. That's where the argument really is. Quite a nice, toasty little summer we've been having so far, right? All right. Nice and warm. I was out last week. So if you remember back from the time I was here, we were looking at Paul and Paul's conversion in Acts chapter 9. And before we got to Paul, we were dealing with Philip. And really the whole focus so far of Acts to this point has been the outward expanse of the gospel and the church. And how it begins in Jerusalem with the 12 waiting for the fall of the Holy Spirit. Then Peter does his great speech, and then several thousand come to Christ, and then they get arrested, and then they create some men called deacons, and Stephen is killed, and then that persecution, the church goes out from Jerusalem as part of the Great Commission. That the persecution, while the attempt was to quell the church, it actually caused the church to explode. And what you had was, originally the church began with those who were Jewish in Jerusalem. And I kind of call those are the Jews. Those are the guys that are like pure. Then you have the Hellenized Jews. They're Jews, but they've adopted more of the Greek flavor. They don't eat the like the Greeks do. They still keep the dietary laws, but they have adopted more of a Greek approach, and their names are going to be Greek. Then you have the Samaritans that the gospel went to, and those are like your cousins that you only want to see at Christmas and Fourth, and then you don't recognize them at Walmart any other time of the year. And so you have that group. And we haven't quite got to the Gentile issue. We will today. And so you see the expanse of the church from being this very small enclave of very rigid individuals to expanding a little bit more, but they're still the same type. They're still same, but slightly different. And then to those who are half-breeds, who are sellout, but yet they still have a lineage with the Jews. And then you're going to see it go to those who have no portion. And the church is going to wrestle with this over the next couple of chapters because there's a lot that is entailed. And one of the ways I look at this is, because of Acts chapter 10, you can eat bacon. Let me try that again. Because of Acts chapter 10, you can eat bacon. Oh, my goodness, is y'all like going, I don't eat bacon. 7 pieces a day, keep the doctor away. I'm not worried about heart disease, folks. You can have bacon, and that's typically how we take Acts chapter 10. And while that's there, there's much more of an impact to what is going on in this passage than it's simply now, you can eat bacon, or you can have catfish, or you can... There's much more to this than simply a dietary change. Because what Peter is going to be confronted with, you're going to kind of see this with some of Peter's behavior, it is similar to what Paul confronts Peter with in Galatians about his rigidity to dietary rules. And that rigidity has to come around who is and who isn't in the kingdom of God. It's because the Gentiles don't have to eat the same way you do. And they don't have a qualms about eating meat offered to gods like the Jews do. And this causes a great deal of friction within the church because you have one group that says, we've always done it this way. And you have the other group going, we don't care. We've always done it this way. And this friction within the church has the potential to actually slow the growth of the church, but yet the apostles, in their wisdom, as we will see later on down the road, develop a plan on how to handle this. And we're going to see this beginning in here in Acts chapter 9 and also into 10. So now, chapter 9, 23, it begins with Peter. We were talking about Paul. Paul had a great sermon series. It was so great, everywhere he went, people tried to kill him. Ministers typically develop a complex when people try to kill you after the first 3 times you've seen. Is my mic on? Because y'all seem like you're like the heat's like sucked the life out of y'all. Come on, folks, let's work together. Now, Peter, when he was going here and there and among them, he came down to the saints who lived in Lydda. You want to pronounce it another way, feel free to do so. And he found a man there named Annas. Now, let's begin. It's going to be a very short healing. It's going to be a very short blurb. And what it's designed to do is get Peter near Joppa or in Joppa, because Caesarea, which is where Cornelius is, and I'm tipping my hand, is just a day's journey down the road. But notice how the text begins. It is as though Peter is willy-nilly just going, he's going here, he's going there. And it almost seems as though his plan and his plot is not being directed. By the time we finish to today, you will see where Peter is being actively directed by the will of God. Now, why is that? Well, first of all, he's going and checking out the expanse of the church. Remember, the church, due to the persecution under Saul, has spread out into the Judean countryside. And Peter, as an apostle, as the apostles did, would go and check on these little enclaves, because here's the thing is, not all of them had an elder. They didn't all have ministers. And so Peter is doing a circuit court kind of, or a circuit pastor kind of thing, where he's going to multiple different places and checking up on the saints that are there because he wants to make sure they're not running afoul. And he goes into this one place and he sees this man, and he's been paralyzed for 8 years, and Peter looks at him, and this is the extent of the story. Christ has healed you. Now notice the interesting phraseology about this. It's not, arise, you are healed. But where does Peter give the power of the healing to? To Christ. This is why when folks, modern day folks, and I was watching some guy this morning, just sheerly out of interest, I guess. I wouldn't say the other thing, out of interest. He kept bragging about how he had the power to heal. Folks, let me tell you that the signs and gifts and the speaking of tongue that's occurring in the first century is a gift that comes from only one source, and you don't possess it. It is given to you, and it can be taken away from you, and it is there. So in the first century, it is designed to prove the validity of who and what the apostles are saying. Also, we're going to start and have a conversation about the word all. Because when we get into salvation theology, a lot of times we take the word all and we take it very monolithically. And we apply it in an overly literal passage in a way in which all sometimes is used and sometimes it's not. And we'll take a look at it right here. And all the residents of Lydda and Sharon saw him and they turned to Christ. Now, if this means every single person, what has happened to these 2 cities? Every member of that town is now a Christian. That's an interesting problem that you have. Did the gospel fall? And I'm not denouncing that could happen, because Peter preaches and 3,000 comes. And here, looky here. Let's say Peter does do this. Peter's on a roll. He has converted 2 full cities. Or is all being used here in the idiomatic format that we typically use it at? The significant number of the people has become Christian in both of those towns, to where you can say all came to be Christians. And this is a struggle that interpreters have. And a lot of times we look at this, and because here's the thing is, when we get into certain salvation passages, we either, if we take all overly woodenly, we end up teaching universalism, because all are saved. Well, if all are saved, then what's the purpose of me accepting Christ as Savior if Christ, through Christ's death, all are saved? See, we don't use it that way. Only when we come to the text do we apply this overly wooden part. When it all can be used to represent the majority, all can be used to represent a select group. And we're going to see that in this passage, all is going to be used separately or differently in all that. So let's say if you take this, that everybody in those towns, although there is no historical validation for either of these 2 cities to have that large scale of conversion, but let's just say all the residents, every single one of them, turned to Christ. Great. Peter moves on. Peter moves on. Now, there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. I think I would stay with Tabitha. By the way, both words, Tabitha is Aramaic, Dorcas is Greek. Both words mean gazelle. She was full of good works and acts of charity. And in those days, she became ill and died. So right on the heels of, let's just say everybody in that town is converted, right upon the heels of a great thing, you run into this individual who dies. And notice the phraseology that is in there. She is what? Full of good works and acts of charity. Now, this is important for when we get into chapter 10, because it's going to kind of help us understand who Cornelius is and what he's doing. In Jewish circles, acts of good deeds and works are very vital to that religion. And Christianity brings that over too. James is an excellent source to go there. You say you have faith by your words. Well, I will show you my faith by my works. And so the church has the concept, and Christianity has the concept of works coming with the actions of faith. Not that works cause your salvation, but works are the outflow. And so this lady who is now here's another interesting thing. She's a disciple. Is she one of the 12? Well, now how can she have this title? Again, we're going to do a little class in hermeneutics. What do you call an individual that is being trained by someone who is more rich in the faith? A disciple. So here is Peter. Peter is a disciple who then has made disciples, of which she is a disciple. Now I've used that word 3 times in a sentence, and have I used it in 3 separate, distinct manners? Yes. She is not a member of the 12. And the reason why I make this distinction is there are some folks in what's known as the egalitarian movement where it says there's no difference between men and women, and so women can be ministers and things like that, that run to this passage and go, well, she's a disciple. She's not one of the 12. She's like you and I. We are all disciples. So that is not proof text that, well, she can be a preacher. She's called a disciple. Usually I have a flat forehead and broad shoulders when dealing with folks like that. It just, the agony just kind of hurts my head at times. She was full of good works. We're going to see what those good works were. She got ill and she died. Now notice something interesting. They put her in the upper room. This is a distinction between Christianity and Judaism. Because in Judaism, do you allow a dead body to stay in your home? No! Not at all. Why? Unclean! You would be ceremonially unclean for a week. This is a distinction of the early church, as a matter of fact, within the first century. And one of the reasons why is many of the early Christians believed that the return of the Lord was imminent. And they were right. And by the way, folks, the return of the Lord is imminent. And we would be right. And so they assumed, because they go off the section where Jesus looks at John and says, what does it matter if this man does not taste death until I return? That John would still be alive when Christ returned. Now, John's been dead since 90. Christ hasn't come back. And it was Jesus was making a totally different one. But they latched onto that and believed that Jesus would return very quickly. And so what they would do is they would put people in the upper room. I don't know why they would do that, because the upper rooms are typically hotter, which typically with dead bodies does not help in reducing the smell of rottage, but helps increase the aspect of rottage, right? But it was all part of the aspect of the resurrection, that these people were there and the Lord would return and raise them. And so that's kind of the mindset as to why they did this odd thing instead of going ahead and burying them. Now, Joppa is near there, and they send for Peter. Please come without delay. Now, does this sound like anything in the Gospels? Matter of fact, in the next couple of passages, there are gospel stories that sound just like this. And your liberals will go, see what Luke did. Luke writes Luke, and now he's writing Acts, and Luke realized he had a bestseller. He wrote a smash hit. It was number 1 on the Roman top 10 marks for months. So what he decided to do was he just took the base formula and he takes out Jesus and he puts Peter in. And he's just reusing old stories. Because Jesus goes and he heals people. And instead of saying, I heal you, they add in Christ. And so now there's a woman in the upper room. And they, please come without delay. This sounds similar to a story about an individual who has died and they sent for Christ. But Christ delays. Lazarus. And so he changes the story just a wee bit. But he's got good material. And the early church is going to eat this up. Or how about this? As the apostles of Christ, for validation of the work of Christ, as they go about amongst the body of Christ, and they run into individuals who have passed on, the extension of the healing that God has extended to the apostles for validation of the apostolic message, they are doing as validation that Christ has risen. Now, that can't be the case, because then Christ would have to have risen. Please come without delay. So Peter went, and when he arrived, they took him to the upper room, and notice right here, all the widows stood beside him weeping. Now, all the widows, is this all the widows in Joppa? And the answer is no, it's all the women that she helped. How do we know? Because they were showing the tunics and the garments that Dorcas made while she was with them. So all here is not being used as all the individuals in the city of Joppa. Joppa is an extremely large town. You couldn't put all the widows in Joppa in that room. But all the widows that she had what? Made tunics and other garments for. So all now in the same passage is being used in a slightly different manner to represent a subsection of the totality, and yet is still all. Now notice what happens. She has made garments for widows. Now, what is true religion undefiled, as James would say? Does anybody know? True religion undefiled is to care for the widows and the orphans. She is performing in the very act that all Christians should be focused on first. Care for those who do not have the ability to care for themselves. So she has made garments for them, and the weeping is there for that to happen. And let's continue on. But now Peter puts them all outside, knelt down and prayed, and turning to the body, he said, Tabitha, does this sound like a story that Christ had? He goes to see a young girl. The people in the house say she's dead. And he goes, no, she's sleeping. And they go, oh, you've lost your mind. You're smoking crack. And he does what? He throws them out of the house. And then he heals the young girl. Again, your liberal will go, see? The liberal theologian will go, see? What Luke is doing is he has now mixed another Christ story into it to give it a little flavor. It's kind of like when you're writing a paper, how you're trying to avoid the whole idea of plagiarism. So you grab a point from here, you grab a point from here, you put it together and you don't cite it. And you go, oh, it's an individual thought I came up with all by myself. I used to grade. That stuff drove me insane. Go back and fix that. And so the accusation here is that, well, Peter's not doing anything. No, here it is. He raises her. She opens her eyes. She sits up. 2 miracles, both amongst Gentiles or Jews? Jews. These are both Jews. They're more than likely Hellenistic Jews. So Peter is still working within the classification of the Jew, and now you're going to see the shift towards a Gentile. Well, what about the Ethiopian eunuch? Yes, I know. We'll talk about him in just a minute. Chapter 10. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what is known as the Italian cohort. Chapter 10 is typically taught from certain standpoints that this is an opportunity or justification where God will send light. Cornelius here is a godless man, or he worships godless pagans. And one day he says, I want to know the real God. And I just want the real God to know, so I'll offer gifts and things, hoping that he'll hear me. And you may have heard it as the Cornelius principle or the Cornelius analogy or things like that. That's a poor hermeneutic, because we're going to see clearly the text identifies that Cornelius is on the pathway to being a proselyte. which is a Jewish convert from the from the Gentile folks. He's part of the Italian cohort, which means that unit was formed in Italy and sent over to Palestine to help bring that region under control. Notice the phraseology here in the next verse discussing the individual named Cornelius. He is a devout man. Nowhere in Scripture are pagans ever addressed in their worship to their God as devout men. The text does not give that nomenclature to pagans. Why? Because pagans are devout. I want to help you out. In the pagan world, there are umpteen gods. Some of the gods allow you to get drunk and then go sleep with a temple prostitute, and you have committed your act of worship that week. I know a lot of men that would be devoted to both those gods. Are they going to heaven? Are either one of those gods the one true God? He's a devout man who what? And in your text, is the God capitalized? Is the G capitalized? Yeah, that's an indicator. It's not talking about some other foreign God, but the one true God. Why? Because he is we'll talk about that here in a minute. With all of his house. Now, this all means all the household, every one of the folks in his house. But not everybody. But anyhow, we'll go on. Giving alms generally to the people. He prayed continually to whom? God. He is known as a God-fearer to the Jews. The Jews would address this individual as a God-fearer. And here's the thing about Judaism and new converts. There were certain things new converts could never do. The Ethiopian eunuch is also a God-fearer. The Ethiopian eunuch can't be a proselyte. A proselyte is an individual that converts completely to Judaism. And one of the ways in which males convert to Judaism, not one of the ways, the way in which a male converts to Judaism is that he must be circumcised. In the case of the Ethiopian eunuch, can he be circumcised? No, he cannot. And they already did a larger circumcision on him. And if you need me to fill that out, ask your mom and dad. And so he is a God-fearer. But in the Jewish religion, what happens is he must stay in the outer court. He must stay in the area for the Gentiles. He's not a true Jew. See, we're the real guys. We're the ones that can trace our lineage. That's why you have those pastoral lineages throughout the whole Old Testament. We're the ones, we can trace our lineage all the way back to Father Abraham. This is why you have Jesus' lineage in Matthew going to Abraham and in Luke going all the way back to Adam. We're Jews. Man, you got the Hellenized Jews. They can come in with us, but they're not the inner group. They've been around long enough to be part of the inner group, but they're not the core. And then you had the Samaritans that they show up every now and then, and now, hopefully one day they actually will join the rest of us. But this Gentile group over here could never, ever come into this group right here, no matter how hard they tried. You know why? They're Gentiles. They're Goyims. And unless you are of Jewish descent, every person in this room is a Goyim. You're of the nations. And in Judaism, there is this hierarchy of who's who, and there's a hierarchy of who gets what. And a lot of times in the church, we pull this hierarchy into the system. Oh, we the core. And you can become so focused about the core. And this is what happened in the church in Jerusalem. Remember, the church was focused about Jerusalem until a man named Saul came in and forced them to go into the outer countryside, and then the church exploded. The time the church had an inward focus, it slowed. Had an outward focus, began to explode. Continue to have an outward focus, continues to explode. Now it's exploding to people who the Jews would believe do not have an inheritance. Yet if you go and read Luke, Christ is already signaling, he wasn't signaling, he was telegraphing his punches that the gospel is going to go to the Gentiles. The gospel is going to go to the Gentiles. In this story of Cornelius, a lot of liberal scholars go, see, this is just like the Roman centurion that comes to see Christ. Yes, I know. Luke had great material. He doesn't have to make it up twice. He's empowered by the Holy Spirit. But Cornelius and the Ethiopian eunuch are called God-fearers. He's not a pagan. He is aware of who the God of the Jews is. He's aware of Yahweh. And he is praying to Yahweh. And he is asking him to enlighten him in that passage. He is not a godless pagan, but he is still a Gentile. And how do you work the Gentile into the church? Well, that goes to that whole bacon thing. In about the 9th hour, that'd be 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he saw clearly a vision of an angel of God saying to him, Cornelius. I think in the middle of my prayer, if an angel came and called me by name, I would need to change clothes. And he startled him in terror. This goes to the concept of the fear of the Lord. Notice Cornelius doesn't go, I reverentially respect you. Thank you for showing up. Notice Cornelius' response. Is it what? It's terror. Even in the New Testament, the concept of the fear of the Lord being reverential respect is a secondary or tertiary understanding of that. The first understanding is when you fear the Lord, it should be of terror. And you know why? Because he is holy and you are not. And this is where Martin Luther struggled over and over and over with before he understood that the righteous man lives by faith. And notice what his response is. It's not the same as Saul, though the wording is the same. Who art thou, or who is it, Lord? When Paul says it, he could be just simply saying, who is it, Master? But here, it's who is it, Kyrios? Who is it, Christ? Who's it, Lord? He's identifying who it is. Why? Because he's seeing him. He's looking to find him. Paul is not. Your prayers have been answered, and they have come up. And it's like when the sacrifices are put upon the altar, and the text describes them as a fragrant aroma unto the nostrils of God. All that you have done have come up to me as a fragrant aroma. And so I am going to have an individual come to you. Now, I'm going to have you send for an individual. He's going to tell him who. So Cornelius, he's not really a Gentile proselyte. We would call him that, but the Jews would not see it that way. He's more of a God-fearer at this stage. Notice what the text says. Now send a man to Joppa and bring one named Simon, who is called Peter. He is lodging with one named Simon the tanner. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. Whose house is by the sea. And when the angel spoke to him and he had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among them, those attending him, and having them repeat everything, having related everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. Is Peter, who is in Joppa a day's way, going to go and meet Cornelius? The answer is yes. Even though Peter has not gotten this revelation until tomorrow. Why? Because Christ, in a dream, has told this man to send for a man named Peter and have him come. And if Christ is saying do this and Peter doesn't come, Christ is starts with an L. He's a liar. So Peter's coming. Peter's going to have a dream about his coming. Peter's going to get the bottom line up front about his coming. Interesting though, notice where Peter is staying. He's staying in a house who's oddly named the same name as him. Must have been very confusing for him with the wife called Simon. It's usually funnier when you laugh. He's a tanner. Does anybody know what a tanner does for a living? It's not like, let me help you out, teenagers, because you might be confused. He's not a guy that goes to the beach, puts funny things over his eyes, and lays out in the sun. He's not a professional tanner that way. He's a tanner. Anybody know what that is? Tans hides. Hides come off of, are those animals alive? So this man is ceremonially unclean. Peter has no qualms staying in a house of a man. Now here's the thing about Jewish culture. Would a Jew do that? No! Are you kidding? Jews won't go into the houses of Gentiles, which is going to cause a problem for Peter when he's sent for, because he's being asked as this group to go to that group and then go into their house. But he seems to be okay in the house of a guy who's unclean. Do you see where Peter has an issue? Yes, Peter is oh so helpful for us in the New Testament. We're going to see some more. The next day, as they were journeying and approaching the city, Peter went up upon the housetop. And in the 6th hour, this would be, if the 9th hour is 3 o'clock, the 6th hour would be, don't make me do math, Brother Ashley, 3 hours from 3. Be noon. You think the brother's hungry? Yes, thank you for playing. And he became hungry and wanted something to eat. And he fell into a trance. He is going to have a dream. And this is where we get the okay to eat bacon. Ready? He sees the heavens open. And something like a sheet descends from the heavens. And it's the whole earth. And here's the thing. All kinds of animals were on it. Does this mean all the animals of the earth were on it? I would contend no. Because if all the animals on the earth were on it, Peter's objection to killing and eating is unnecessary because he would just kill a clean animal. This would be all the unclean animals. And so all is now being used in a totally different. It's used to distinguish between two groups, clean and unclean. Why is that? Because if the clean animals were on there, he would just go, okay, and he'd go and kill and eat. And notice what Peter does. Arise, Peter, kill and eat. This comes from the Lord. Now, Peter is overly willing to obey God's command, right? So I want to help you out here. The juju is going to struggle with this new thing called Christianity because it's new and it's different and the rules will slightly change and things won't look the same way. See, under the juju mindset, you don't eat unclean animals. You don't kill animals. I don't know how they do without their bacon. I don't eat my eggs without bacon. You want to make a burger better? You slap some bacon on it. You want to make a steak better? You wrap that bad boy in bacon. You want to make chicken better? Bacon. Broccoli? Bacon. Beans? Bacon. Any bean, for God's sakes. Put any bean. Put a whole bunch of bacon in. I detest beans almost as much as I do corn. You want to make corn better? You baking up that corn, man. You got people standing in line. The thing is, though, is to that group of the Jujus, this concept is going to be extremely radical. And it's going to be scary. Because they've always done life a certain way. And Christ is going to take that and turn it up on its head. Why? Because the goal is that the gospel goes out, not stays inner focused. The goal is the gospel goes to the Gentiles. Because guess which of the population is the largest within the world? The Jews or all the Gentiles of the earth? All the Gentiles of the earth. And so for the gospel to spread to the other ends of the earth, it must mean it has to eventually leave the inner circle of the core to the outer focus of those who have not heard. Therefore, it must go outward. Well, how do you go outward when your dietary laws say you can't go into another person's house because they're a Gentile, or eat off their plate because they're a Gentile, or eat the food they eat because they're a Gentile? Well, Jesus is going to fix this for Peter real quick. Kill and eat. And Peter says, by no means, Lord, have I ever killed anything or anything that's common and unclean. This is how we know that the animals on the sheet, there are no unclean animals. They're all unclean. A lot of folks will make this passage about, because of where it's at, and it is, that this is only about an argument for the Gentiles. It has nothing to do with dietary laws. The problem with that argumentation is that he's using the dietary laws to make his point. Christ, if he wanted to exclude the dietary laws, could have done what he did with Ezekiel and tell Ezekiel to cook his food over animal dung, which the Jews were forbidden to do. And Ezekiel's response is, I'm not doing it. And Christ could have made the same point again. But yet he chooses only the unclean animals to make his point. This is why, and Paul does not have the issue with meat offered to idols. Why? Because are idols real gods? No, they don't exist. They're just, if I tomorrow turned the megaphone there into the God of sound and said we all must bow and worship, is there anything there other than that foam megaphone? Is it real? Only in the fact that it's there. But it has no real power. And so this is why the dietary laws go with it. So as the Jews go into the world of the Gentile, there is now no longer a barrier as to being able to enter their house, as to being able to eat the food that's put before you, as to being able to eat off the plate without having to dip it. All the barriers that would be there now must go away in order for the gospel to expand. But it requires this group to move out of its shell and to embrace this group and what they believe. And the church is going to wrestle with this. Here's the problem. The church continues to wrestle with this. You know how we wrestle with it today? We wrestle with it over furniture. I guarantee you if I leave that plexiglass there for like 6 months, I'm going to hear about it. And it's because that piece of wood is more of an idol than it is anything. And that's a shameful thing. If we had switched to just straight contemporary, I guarantee you I'll hear about it. Yet your culture is one of the fastest ways to reach the younger culture, your millennial and Generation Z, because it's a hook. But we want it because this is what we want. See, notice that when the church focuses that way, it stops growing. When the church focuses outward to the beyond what it wants, to the folks that need the gospel message and apply all that it needs towards it, then it grows. It's hard to be that group. But the requirement is to be the group that embraces the things that's scary. To move forward into a direction. This is going to be hard for Peter. And how do I know this is going to be hard for Peter? And the voice came to him again a second time. So how many times is God saying this to Peter? No, he says it 3 times. We'll see in a minute. Do not call clean that which I've called common. Do you know, for the longest time in church history, pulpits were over here and they were elevated 10 feet in the air? Do you know that? Do you know that for the longest time in church history, that you had different types of instruments being played? And sometimes no instruments. And sometimes you had chanting. And sometimes, and while your churches always had music, hymnology, brother, am I right? About the 15th century when a man by the name of Martin Luther, and guess what he tied all of his hymns to? Pub songs. You know, secular music sung by drunks in the bar. Can't have that. Why? So the gospel can reach those who it's intended to reach. The drunk at the bar who needs to hear the message. Churches have changed over their time. Here's the issue about the culture that you're trying to reach. If you're still fighting the worship war, you will not draw. Millennials do not want to be involved in that. Generation Z does not want to be involved in that. Your later Xers don't want to be involved in that. They want a church that's already made up its mind. And here's the thing is, going back to hymns is not one of their things they cotton to. And if you go and look at the demographics of the church that are growing in Killeen, guess which worship style they have? And guess which worship style they don't? What about First Church is big and they're the exception to the rule? Because they possess enough money to get past that. Because those churches have embraced a style of worship that is a hook into the heart and mind of the young person to bring them to the point of accepting the message of Jesus Christ instead of saying, go away, we don't want you. We're this group here and you must conform to this group. Now notice, Peter is not having Cornelius conform to him. God is having Peter conform to Cornelius. Do you see the difference? He says to him, do not call clean, or what I may clean common. Now watch what happens. This happens. There's something about Peter. There's just something about this cat. How many times does he deny Christ? After saying, oh no, Lord, it won't be me. Peter's a great example of open mouth and insert foot. And it's a great example for us as believers to see that even an apostle can still mess up, and God hasn't turned him into a grease stain upon the carpet. 3 times he says this. Well, let's go to chapter 10, verse 19. And while Peter was pondering the vision, now think about this. He's pondering what's said. Should I kill and eat? Can I have bacon? Man, I love some catfish. While he's pondering all of that, the Spirit says, behold, 3 men are looking for you. And so the Spirit, they come and they look, and he tells him, arise and go and accompany them without hesitation, for I have sent them to you. And he comes out and says, I'm the one you're looking for. What is the reason why you come? And notice what they say. They said, Cornelius, a centurion, an upright, God-fearing man who is well spoken of by the whole Jewish nation. Is this man a pagan, worshiping pagan gods? Or is this man a man who's a God-fearer who's following the God of Yahweh of the Jews? Yeah. Who's spoken well of by the whole Jewish nation, was directed by an angel to send for you to come to our house to hear what you have to say. Now you have to understand, Jesus tells him to immediately go with those men, and he is told to go to the house of a Gentile. Jews don't go into the house of Gentiles. Hellenized Jews might, because of their Greek nature, or because of the fact they've been embraced some of the Greekness. Samaritans will, because they're unclean anyway from the Jewish standpoint. But a Jew will not enter the house of a Gentile at all. And yet Christ has commanded him to go. And so we see from the vision of the thing coming down, it's not simply about dietary laws. It is about embracing a group of people that the gospel is going to springboard into. And Peter's going to be one of the first ones that engages in this by embracing a centurion who is going to have a greater impact on the world because of where he is going to go as a member of a Roman cohort. We're going to see this as the gospel continues to expand to what Paul does, as Paul goes into the Gentile world. And the focus of the church is to move from this little cloistered enclave of the core into a broad accepting group into the world of Christianity, into the pagan world with the message of Jesus Christ. Now that doesn't mean that we accept everything that is pagan into the church and call it good. But what that does mean is that we do not put things in the way that hinder those who would be coming to the gospel of Christ, because that is something that brings us comfort. See, here's the thing. The gospel all the way through Luke, Matthew, Mark, and John is always telling us to put the needs of others behind our preferences or ahead of our preferences. Ahead. Matter of fact, the command is always to treat others better than yourself. And when we end up with this idea of, well, the world must conform to us, and the church must conform to how we do church, and this is the only way to do church, and this is the only way in which church can be done, and this has to be the only way because this is how it was brought up. You are simply nothing more than the concept of the Jew that does not want to expand. And yet, in reality, the message is to go into the world. And we are actually to be doing things that conform the world to Christianity, but not to rigidity. The church in America is struggling. It's struggling for several reasons. It's struggling with its identity because we have always done things the way we've always done things. And yet, the culture of society today struggles with this. Regular church attendance among millennials, to understand regular church attendance among that mindset, at best, is 2 times a month. They would consider themselves a regular attendee. Many of you in your generation, a regular attendee was someone who showed up anytime the doors were open. Do you see the difference in mindset between those 2 generations? And the mindset must change. Why? Because if the mindset doesn't change, that generation will go find a church that embraces that. And it doesn't mean you leave them there. No, absolutely. You pull them towards, hey, I think you should be in church because you do not forsake the gathering together of the body. Not, well, unless you're really truly committed. I guess you're just not committed to Christ if you can't be here every Sunday. Did you hear the judgment in that statement? Yeah. Do you think when you judge somebody that way, they're going to show up? No. And so the church is struggling with its identity. The churches that are still struggling with their identity are still fighting the worship war. Look, I like traditional music. I really do. It wasn't until I went to Italy and was forced down into the contemporary service that I saw the power of that style to pull young individuals who would rather spend their Sunday night starting at 6:30 to about 8, because that's how long we went. Rather spend that last night before PT the next morning getting hammered. Instead, they were coming to church. Why? Because the church was meeting them where they were and pulling them upward. I didn't demand they fit my model. I braced my model to help them embrace. The church is going to struggle with this Gentile enclave, with this Gentileness coming in. And it's going to struggle. And matter of fact, that you're going to get down to, well, we need to get these guys cut because they're not truly a member of the body of Christ until they're circumcised. And most of the apostles are going to go, yeah, I think we're going to take a step back on that one. See, the church in the first century struggling just like the church today. The difference was the church in the first century was willing to embrace the mission of the world that it was in. Whereas the church in America today is very resistant to its mission. Because we like what's comfortable. We like what is comfortable. We like to come in and have nothing changed. Peter liked eating clean food. After he had bacon, though, that brother didn't go back. You'll find that it's weird at first, sometimes strange. And then there'll be one time where you will embrace it. I'll tell you why. I had a friend at a piano. It was over there. And he moved it X number of feet a year. Just because he wanted it over here. But he knew that if he moved it over here on one Sunday, that he would get fired because that's just how churches roll. And so he moved it just a little bit every year. And while the piano was right there, the congregation swore up and down that the piano had always been there. Until he showed him a photograph of the 13-year process. The church in America doesn't have 13 years. Most churches in America are in a decline state, 10 years at tops, typically, and then they close. And the reason being is because they don't want to branch out and they don't want to embrace new and they don't want to get out of their comfort zone. And the fact of the matter is, folks, churches need to adapt to the culture in which they are in with the gospel of Jesus Christ to reach those who aren't supposed to be part of the core, but they're out here waiting for us to take the gospel to them. Peter is obedient and goes. Since January, I've been talking about our one. Who's your one? I've had my one. One of my ones this week told me, don't ask me again. I can guarantee you that I will. This is how I roll. Where are you at with your one? Well, Brother Ashley, I don't believe I have a one. Every one of you has a one. You have one individual that you encounter either on a weekly basis, or even on a random occasion that you could talk to about coming to church or sharing the gospel presentation. Where are you with your one? Are you obedient to the command that is given by God to be going? Or are you over here in your comfort zone going, it's for somebody else. I'd rather be comfortable. The church doesn't go to the Galatians if Peter doesn't do what he does. The church doesn't go to the Gentiles. The church doesn't go to the Gentiles if Paul doesn't go beyond his comfort zone. Comfort zone Christianity is cultural Christianity. Where are you with your one? You can ask Steph, you can go to Chili's. We've just about asked every waiter there, hey, do you come to church? And we have one that shows up, and she's starting to get a little obnoxious. Okay? She shows over and wants to tell her life story, and I'm very much of an introvert. Steph is an extrovert, but I'm very much of an introvert. When I come to eat, all I want to do is You got it. I don't want to hear your life story. I don't want to hear what happened that week. I'm sorry. I'm here to eat. But Steph loves it, so I let them go on, and they sit and chit-chat, and I'm like, I'd like to order, please. I don't mean to be rude, but I'd like for you to fulfill your job as I'm going to pay you. But because I don't want to be that rude guy, I listen and go, I'll have a Diet Coke. Yeah, some chips, that would be great too. No, not so much. Where are you with your one? Where are you with the struggle of what church looks like? Because if this is where you want to be, I can tell you where we will be. If this is where you want to be, the limit is limitless. What church do you want to be? As the praise band comes to lead us, I want you to think about it. I want you to ask yourself, am I reaching my one? And if not, why? Am I wanting church to be about me and not the individual out there that's needing Christ, and I adjust so that I can reach them? Where's your heart and your ability to reach out to those who need the gospel?